Hello, in this video, we will introduce exception classes in the C++ library. These are the classes provided in the C++ library. This is the root of the exception classes. Runtime error. On the runtime error, it's overflow error, underflow error, bad allocation error, bad cast, logic error, invalid argument, length error, out of range, bad exception, bad type ID. Runtime error class is the best class for several standard exception classes that describes runtime errors. Class overflow error describes an arithmetic overflow that's a value is too large to be stored. Class underflow error describes an arithmetic underflow that is a value too small to be stored. The logic error is a best class for several standard exception classes that describes logical errors. Invalid argument, length errors, out of range errors, so they can also be used to indicate invalid argument, the length exceeding the maximum allowed length, out of range indicates the value has exceeded the allowed range. So let's look at the examples for some of the exceptions here. First, I'm going to look at this. It's the, you can, for the quotient function, if number is 2 is 0, so you can write this is to through runtime error. So you can write this through runtime error. So this is using the runtime error here. Divisor cannot be 0. So this runtime error. Now please note that when you use catch, you pass an object, exception object, use pass by reference. So this way it's more efficient because you're not going to modify EX. So it's if you use pass by value, it's still working, but it's not efficient. So now you actually can see this. The catch is something like this. When you call this function, it through exception, it's actually, this catch is like you're calling it by passing the exception object. So let's look at bad allocation exception. So you are allocating too many memory space that exceeds the allowed memory on your computer. So what you do, and you can see that this is a bad allocation error. So if you run this program, and you're going to receive a bad allocation error. So after you create many arrays, and now up to this point, you're going to see the bad allocation error. So this is, here's bad casting error is now, you can see this is the rectangle. So you're going to cast this to circle, and this gives you the bad cast error. So the reason is for this one here, right here, is let me see this. You run this program now and see what you have is you're receiving some errors. So this is casting errors here. Now let's look at this example here. Invalid argument exception. You can use this through the invalid argument exception here for this function get area. Look at the radius. If radius is less than 0, so you can throw invalid argument. And now here to catch this exception. Now you probably noticed that this is invalid argument. So why use exception? Well, you don't have to. You can say, I'm going to use invalid argument. This is just fine. So using exception is also, it's okay because exception is a super type for invalid argument. That is all for this section. C++ exception classes. You can use the exception classes in your program to through exception and to handle exception. See you on the next video.